Thank you, Brian. And Brian, I'll rely on some of your guidance tonight. Please keep me on track, as this is the first time I'm stepping in.
Sure thing.
Thank you. I'll just go right down the agenda and I'll just read off that. So if there's something out of place, feel free to chime in. We'll do our call to order and roll call.
I have the attendance of the members taken.
Okay. Should we, then we'll just read off by names as I see them on screen. And okay, I got Brian Shaw.
Here.
Michelle Bond.
Here.
Kevin Munson. Here. Alder Hanero.
Here.
And let's see, do we have, and Alder Fassard.
Present.
Do we have a quorum?
We do.
Okay, thank you. Next is proof of posting and notice. Do we have our minutes posted publicly?
Yes, the agendas were posted and sent over the city listserv.
Okay. And those are posted at the airport as well, as I understand.
They are.
Thank you very much, Rich.
Mm-hmm.
And then go ahead, let's review the minutes. And one of the commissioners may speak up when you feel that everybody's had a chance to go through it. Any questions? Please bring those to our attention.
Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Very good. And all those in favor of the minutes as posted, please say
Aye.
anybody opposed? Okay, thank you. Next item. Chair's report. Oh. Somebody have a comment? No? Okay. Chair's report. I just reviewed a couple notes and comments from the previous meeting. So I think looking at what's here and what's listed about, the only thing looks like everything will be on the current agenda for tonight. So I don't have any updates or anything to add or input at this point. So we can move.
Just, Mr. Chair, just as a point of information, there was a question from the last meeting about the timing of the delivery of the used field truck. The update we got from the company in Ohio is that it's scheduled for final inspection on March 13th. Once it's passed that final inspection, then we'll have a better sense of when the delivery date would be scheduled to Maury Field.
Okay, thanks. I was going to ask Rich if he had any information on that when we got to his area as well. Do you want to add anything about the fuel truck at this point, Rich? Nope. Or is he on mute?
We'll have to just see what happens with the inspection, see what comes up out of that, and I'm eager to get it here. So.
Okay, thanks. Now we can move on to the airport manager's report.
Okay, quiet month. February is short, of course, but from January 26th to February 21st, one individual made a total of 7 overflight or noise reports. They contacted me directly, and I responded to them directly via email. No accidents or incidents on the field. The Knox boxes have been populated with keys of the hangars and are in place. Snow removal has gone well. The heavy stuff that we had with the ice on top was hard to move, but we were able to take care of it. Other news, again, we are eagerly await our truck for the Swift fuel. February 4th, we're going to be hosting another Youth Aviation Club event in the conference room. Oh, we did host, excuse me. February 18th was the Chapter 93 of EA annual chili feed and meeting. It was nice to have the group around. We've started our ground school in person now. As of the 21st, we'll be starting the instrument ground school as of March 16th. And then I just got this in, April 8th, we're going to be having a Young Eagles rally from 9 o'clock until noon. If anyone knows of any young people between 8 and 18 that are interested in getting introduction into aviation, a very good one at no cost to themselves, please let me know. I have, they can register online.
All right, thanks, Rich. Does anybody have any questions for Rich at this point?
I do. I can't get my hand to go up.
Oh,
Is it okay if I speak?
yeah, of course. That would be, Brian can work on the technical issues behind the scene.
Yeah, okay. Hey, Rich, so a quick question. So one individual, 7 reports, were any of those noise reports or whatever they were, was there any sort of violation or not complying with the noise abatement or anything like that?
There was not, Kevin. This was all in association with our regular operations and our noise abatement procedure. Aircraft that were over that area had they're west of here about 2.5 miles. They'd have completed their climb and had throttled back and had turned most likely. There were a couple of screenshots of tracks. That was the case, as well as one aircraft that had just left the area and was climbing up above, apparently had talked to Madison, was above 2,700 feet. So, there's very seldom is there anything that is brought to my attention. Actually, I don't recall anything that would be a violation. It's all been perfectly acceptable practices and generally within the voluntary noise abatement procedure.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Rich.
Rich, I had one note.
Yes, sir.
We were going to look at the pilot handbook. Is that updated?
That was on my list to do, and I'm afraid I forgot. I'm almost positive that it has been updated.
Okay, thanks.
I will double check on that.
All righty. Okay, any more questions for Rich? All right, great. Moving on. Airport financials. I don't have anything other than one note I looked at. Maybe Brian can help on this. Question was remaining, did we receive CARES funds?
I'd have to verify with counting to see if that's been received, but I can check in on that and send a note to let people know.
Okay, so then we'll just make sure that's in our notes and next month we can continue to follow up on that. And I see Alder Hanero has a hand raised now that the hand raising is working. Thank you.
Kevin, it's in reactions. Anyway, thank you. I had a couple questions. One, and maybe this is for Brian, have we updated the fuel flowage fee yet to 10 cents per gallon? And if not, when will we do that?
Let me check with finance too to see if that's been implemented in the system, but I'll ask finance and get a response back to everybody.
I can tell you it has been. It is as of January 1, and we're now paying 10 cents a gallon. Somehow I wasn't informed of that until after we made our first payment, so we made up the difference.
Okay, and I think at a future meeting, ideally next month, we'll have the truck and be able to sell the 94 unleaded fuel. And maybe that would be a good time to discuss whether or not we want to subsidize the purchase of that unleaded fuel, possibly using that small increase that we'll be getting on the fuel flowage fee. Second question I had is, has everyone, it looks like all the leases have been paid. There's no lease payments outstanding. Is that correct? And maybe that was for Brian too.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Brian.
I'm writing. I'm not aware of any lease payments that are outstanding.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Any other discussion on financial? Okay, moving on. Discussion regarding compatible land use document plan concept. I guess one of the notes I saw from the previous meeting, language was used, comprehensive land use plan. So I would just open this discussion up. It was, an agenda item for open discussion and see where it goes. This was brought on initially at the last meeting by Alder Panero and Kevin. And I see hands up already. So we'll start with Kevin.
Oh, thanks. Can everyone hear me? So, try to keep this quick so we can kind of go around the table. So yeah, compatible land use plan as opposed to comprehensive. Comprehensive is more involved. That includes all forms of transportation. So what I'm looking at here is compatible in the way it's defined by the Wisconsin Airport Land Use Handbook, which most of that information was taken from the California Airport Land Use Handbook, which is much more involved and goes into a lot more detail, and which Mead and Hunt and many other organizations, engineering organizations, and the private sector and the public sector were involved in developing about 10 to 15 years ago. So one of the things that a majority of the feedback that we've received, especially in, if we go back a couple of years and during the AMPAC committee and all that, was that a lot of concern around noise, airplanes flying over people's homes, and also people not knowing. I heard the same theme over and over again. We didn't know when we moved in that we were under a traffic pattern, or we've lived here for a while, and now because of COVID, we're at home more. We didn't realize that the planes flew over our house so much, or we moved out of Middleton Hills. We moved out into the town of Middleton because we kind of wanted to get away from it all and have more isolation, and only to discover that planes fly over our house, et cetera, et cetera. So, I reached out to, I heard all this. So on my own, I'd reach out to the realtors and say, hey, do you disclose these kind of things, such as there's an airport within 2 or 3 miles of this development, or you're selling this home? And usually the answer was no, not that particularly. We don't do that. We just follow the rules and regulations from the state of Wisconsin through the title companies, and we disclose what we're required to, but not specifically, no, we don't disclose that. We don't disclose that someone may be living close to a belt line. It all comes under one purview. So the idea of a compatible land use plan, airport land use plan, is not necessarily zoning. Not that zoning is that effective anyway, because it can be changed at any time, the zoning regulations and rules, but the idea of this, which is already defined in the Wisconsin, to a certain extent, the Wisconsin Airport Land Use Plan, and a good place to start there, as I made some notes, is page 33 of that handbook, or if you want to look into more detail as far as guidance, the recommended guidance on different types of development and noise sensitivity and safety regarding the airport is page 317 and page 420. It's just a place to start because some of these handbooks are quite involved. It takes quite an effort just to find this information. But the idea is that it's just guidance. It's just a way to allow people to, whether they're the public sector, say the city of Middleton or the town of Middleton or Dane County, or the developers or the homeowners, the buyers, to have more information regarding what is considered, currently best practices for the type of development that you're thinking about either developing or purchasing or living, and whether it's a residential or it's a hospital or it's a school or it's commercial, what's considered best practice. For me, when I moved here, I was aware of all this, so I spent a couple of years studying it, but for most people, they don't know. And how do we get that information, out to people so they can easily, so they can make a better decision? And that's what a compatible land use plan is. It's just a general guidance document. It already exists. It's more, how do we disseminate that information? And how do we make sure as city planners and developers that we take a look at that information and to help us make better decisions in terms of planning our communities? So that's sort of my introduction, just to kick off a discussion to whoever else would like to chime in.
Rich, you had your hand up?
I did, and Kevin really touched on an awful lot of what I was interested in, or at least certain areas. I don't know if it's possible. I know looking at a height limitation zoning ordinance is easily pointed out that should have happened back in the late 60s, early 70s, but the city, of course, didn't own the airport until nearly 2000. So a lot of the development already occurred, and that was beyond the scope or possibility of a privately owned entity like we were at that time. But now what I believe the city has already done this with one development not terribly far from here. It's simply pointed out that in the deeds to these condos that were being built, there had to be a disclosure that you are close to an airport. I think that looking at that is for zoning, just to have that as a possibility of any developments that occur within the next 2 to 3 miles of this place ought to have that notification. Whether that is legally even a possibility with zoning, or how that would be achieved, or even if it may not be achievable, but that is something that seems to make sense to me, that anyone moving into the area, or especially those that are building new, should know that they're or as part of their deed, where you're close to an airport.
Okay. Luke, I saw your hand pop up just before Lisa's, but now
Yeah, actually, I would love to hear Alder Hanairo's take on this first, and then I'll go.
Okay.
Thank you, Alder Fassard, and thank you for correcting my last, or pronouncing my last name correctly. I was going to correct David that it's Hanairo. It rhymes with Cairo, like in Egypt, not like in Illinois, because then it would be Cairo. Anyway, the idea of covenants and restrictions is something that occurred to me too, because we did just council just on the 22nd, or I'm sorry, the 21st, we looked at the covenants and restrictions for Red Tail Ridge, and Bell Farm has the same one. It's a perpetual deed restriction that says a general aviation airport exists. Actually, now that I read it, that's just in the final plat. That is not specified as being a deed restriction. We've got farming as a deed restriction, so I stand corrected. But that might be something we could do, and I'd be curious to hear Brian's comments on that. We'd have to define what the radius is, and then we would also, if it's going to be a policy, we would need to figure out, does that just apply to the new developments? We've only got the 2 coming in, and they're going to take up much of the remaining land. But what about when someone in Misty Valley, for example, wants to sell their property and they're within whatever radius we define? Would they be grandfathered in? Would they have to incorporate that? So those are the points we would definitely need to work in. And then, of course, the big problem is this would work fine for the city, but we have no jurisdiction over the towns. And so that, we might solve part of the problem, but we won't solve all the problem with airport neighbors being concerned about the noise.
I will echo that particular around the jurisdiction. I would argue that the majority of the individuals that would request such a documentation or notification don't reside in the city of Middleton itself, but instead the town of Springfield or the town of Middleton, or perhaps even the village of Cross Plains. Therefore, the city of Middleton Airport Commission doesn't necessarily have any sort of authority. The additional component of it too is I feel as though the last couple of years, this commission, the scope of what we are responsible for has gotten larger and larger. We're now talking about land zoning in areas outside of the airport, when my understanding is this commission is really designed for the safe execution of the airport itself. Now, one could make an argument that it's all, kind of tangential or related, but to me, it feels like we're playing a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole where, okay, we're going to address the noise, and we're going to then put these covenants in place, and all of the new developments are going to be notified. That's not going to satisfy the people that have already moved in. And so then they're going to say, well, what if we do this? And they're like, okay, great, we're going to do that. Then we're going to do this, we're going to do that. All the while, every moment that we're spending on that, it's kind of taking our eyes off of, again, the safe operations of the airport itself. And so I just caution this commission to really try and think of what are the boundaries by which we should, stay within our lane, so to speak, versus trying to be everything to everyone.
Okay, thank you. Kevin has his hand back up.
Yeah, right. So let me repeat again. Compatible land use plan is not zoning. So I guess I must not have mentioned that. It's definitely not zoning. It's not a policy. It's just information. It's just guidance, and it already exists. It exists in the Wisconsin Airport Land Use Handbook, which was taken from the California Land Use Handbook. If there was some confusion, just let me know. So we're not talking zoning, and this is just so everyone knows, this is a typical responsibility of at least to get the information out and request of an airport commission. We don't have, like many towns and cities, we don't have a separate airport land use commission. I used to be on that too when I was in California. So we had both the airport commission and the airport land use commission. So we could, though we didn't have the authority to make decisions, we could make recommendations. And so, yeah, I strongly feel that this is anything that's, and again, that's why it was last meeting or the meeting before, I handed out all these reference materials, literally tens of thousands of pages, so everyone could be aware of and familiar with all available information that we may be called upon. So as I'm saying, we don't have there's not even a guidance out there that we're looking at, or that developers are looking at, or this town is looking at, the city is looking at. And I'm saying it exists, and how do we best disseminate that information? So because right now the feedback that this commission is getting, again, and I'll repeat that again, because just to make sure everyone understands that the people that are purchasing homes, that are moving here, that are moving in, or perhaps building homes, they're not aware of what is compatible land use. They're not aware that there are airplanes that potentially are flying over their homes because they're near the traffic pattern. They're within 2 or 3 miles of the airport. There's no information out there that they can reference or that they can study to help them to make a better decision. I've been trying to get this on the airport, on the agenda for several years, because when I moved here many years ago, I couldn't find the information either. I said, where is the club? Can I see the club? And I went to the city and they didn't even know what it was. So which was really surprising. And again, it's not a policy. It's not meant to be a policy. It's not meant to be zoning. And it already exists. It's just a matter of how do we disseminate that information? How do we make it more transparent? How do we get it out to be? I don't know too many people that are willing to dig through tens of thousands of documents to find this. And that's something that should be readily available to everyone. It's certainly something the city planner should be considering, at least considering. And there's a lot of guidance documents they look at when they develop new areas. There's also policies, there's also zoning, there's ecological regulations, but most of it is just best practices. So that's all I'm saying. How do we disseminate these best practices that already exist?
Okay, thank you. Alder Hanairo had her hand up, but then Brian Shaw put his up.
I'm okay with Brian going next. since
Okay.
I've already spoken.
I don't think anyone's going to go through, if you're a new home buyer in Red Tail Ridge, that's the new one, right? If you have the ability to look at a map and see if there's an airport, in the same way that you have the ability to look at a map and see that there is a gravel excavation pit that's very close to your home. And none of those things are on required paperwork that has to be filed. So, I do think that there is due diligence that people need to do. If you see on a map and the airport is quite large, if you pull up any map, that you would have an airport near you and what that means. We've done good work to show what those flight patterns are. Like, those are available at the airport. We discussed what those were, a number of months ago. So I'm not sure that there's anything specific that needs to be done, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Lisa, please.
Okay, so back to what Brian just said. So due diligence, yes, that's really important. Then I wonder though, why do we have why is it okay to have the ag restriction or the statement put in the deeds that, Wisconsin's right to farm place, and the buyer is acknowledging that there's farmland in the area and they have the right. So I don't disagree with you, Brian, but I guess I'm wondering for the other Brian, where do we draw the line? When can we include something? When do we have to include something in as a deed restriction, and when do we not have to? Going back to Alder Fassard's comments about staying in our lane, I totally agree that we need to define what we're going to work on. In the ordinance, we're charged with this. It says the commission shall advise the administrator and the common council with regard to planning, development, and operation of the airport within budgetary guidelines and legal requirements. And I think the legal, I'm always talking about trying to make the airport self-sustaining. The legal requirements, though, that's all of our assurances. And I think that might be what triggers a need for us to consider something like, we talked about the land use zoning ordinance that was not picked up by council. And then Kevin Munson's suggestion that we talk about compatible land use. I think that is appropriate. At the very least, if we said, yeah, we're going to try to not focus on these issues, we'll let council deal with it. Luke, you know that council's going to say, what did the airport commission have to say? So I think it's for practical reasons, it's important for us to wade into it, even though it does take us away from other things. And then finally, the ordinance also says the commission shall make studies and conduct surveys as appropriate to assist in improving the operation of the airport. And one could argue that trying to be a good neighbor and be mindful of the needs of residents both here and outside of Middleton, that by reducing the number of complaints about noise, or at least by making people aware before they move into an area within the 2 or 3 mile radius of the airport, if we can reduce the incidence of noise complaints, I think that will in the long run improve operation of the airport.
Thank you. Kevin, and you had your hand up next and then followed by Luke.
So thanks, Lisa, for reminding me. I left out the AIP grants. So we are required to do something in terms of compatible land use, and what the grant assurance says. I think it's number 21, but correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have it in front of me. It says up to and including zoning, which I'm not a big fan of zoning, but I am a fan of disseminating information, being aware of and familiar with all available information and making it as easy as possible. And I think that's part of the idea of the grant assurance, grant assurances. So we are required to put some sort of compatible land use plan together. My argument is the Caltrans and the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, I think it's Wisconsin DOT, has done it, in the University of California, Berkeley, and other places have done a tremendous amount of work around this. What's out there now is best practices, and it's just easy. The easiest thing to do is just to adopt best practices, right? Why reinvent the wheel? And adopt it in terms of having it available, readily available, having guidance, having it as a guidance document as it is now, and educating people. Education is very, very important. So I just wanted to mention that we are required to do something. If somebody has a better idea, wants to take a different approach, I'm all for it. It's another thing that we can discuss here moving forward. Thank you.
How are we going to enforce this with the other municipalities?
Oh, yeah. Are you asking me, Luke?
Yes.
So again, we wouldn't even enforce it. It's not an enforceable action. It's just general information. Again, as I said,
but Kevin, you said it already exists, right?
That's correct.
So then if it already exists, what are we talking about? We're just trying to make the people more aware of something that already exists. So we're talking about PR. You're on mute, Kevin.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wouldn't say PR. I would say how do we better disseminate the information and consider it for all those decision makers, and how do we formally say, for our grant assurances, we need to do something. So how do we formally say, yes, we're adopting these guidelines?
We already have. You just said that we already have them in place.
No, the state has them in place. We don't. Because the reason I say that is I've asked to see those. We need a club for our airport, for Middleton Airport. How do we meet Part 21? Or Article 21, I think it is. So how do we do that? And right now, we don't have anything. I can promise you we don't. So I've gone to the city many, many times and asked for it. I want to see it. And this has been over the past 14 years. And they say, we do not have anything except the Terps Part 77 height restrictions, which is, that's a federal law. So that they do have the height restriction part of that. And that's really all that they look at. But we don't have a compatible land use plan guidance that takes into account the safety areas around the airport and noise, and then further out, is the safety. Again, it's as far as basic guidances, and that would be page 33 of the Wisconsin handbook and page 317 and 420 of the Caltrans handbook, if you want to take a look. And that's where they reside, but most people aren't even aware of that, nor are the city planners. So we just need to, do a better job. And like I said, it's just one suggestion on how we might want to meet the requirements of a club. And it's my suggestion. If you have a better suggestion, let's hear it. Let's bring it on.
I know Mark's got his hand up, so the last thing I'll just simply say is this: since this idea was floated, what was it, a couple months ago, originally by John, I think the initial blowback was negative, and so we just got to be very careful about how we, position this, because I think some folks viewed it as some sort of a power grab on behalf of the airport and the airport commission, and that's not at all what we're talking about here. And so we just got to be very careful and very cognizant of, if we trudge down this path, making sure people fully understand what it is and what, most importantly, what it is not.
I agree.
Mark Opitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can offer some helpful information. Two things. One, number 21 of the grant assurance is compatible land use. I thought it'd be helpful just to read it since it's been brought up. It's short. It says it will take appropriate action to the extent reasonable, including the adoption of zoning laws to restrict the use of land adjacent to or in the immediate vicinity of the airport to activities and purposes compatible with normal airport operations, including landing and takeoff of aircraft. In addition, if the project is for noise compatibility program implementation, it will not cause or permit any change in land use within its jurisdiction that will reduce its compatibility with respect to the airport or the noise compatibility program measures upon which federal funds have been expended. So I guess the question I would have is, what is the definition of immediate vicinity? I think a common definition of using Google is 500 feet, but that's subject to interpretation. The second comment I would offer is that we have actually in the past asked for plats to have deed restrictions attached to them, identifying the existence of the airport. I recall in the town of Middleton, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, and I can't remember which small subdivision, might have been Legacy Highlands, I'm not sure which, but we asked, when the city had to review it, we asked that language be added. We also recently had the council add this to, at the last week's meeting, as a condition of the preliminary plat approval for Red Tail Ridge. So I just wanted to dispel the notion that the city has not been concerned about this in the past. The Lexus dealership actually installed some netting over its riprap or whatever it was around its stormwater system, because it's in the immediate vicinity of the airport. So those are some of the things we've done.
Any other further comments, discussions? I guess I'll just weigh in on my own final comment and observation of it then. I understand and see where this can go on either way, in terms of just a compatible land use plan, a document pointing towards and used for educational purposes of existing guidelines that are out there, put forth by the BOA, FAA, and our grant assurances. I mean, that's one route this can go. And I understand that, you know, it's not going to fly in terms of ordinance and really adopting policies that clearly are going to affect relationships with our neighbors to the west. So I understand both sides of it. I think understanding what is immediate vicinity to the airport might be worth vetting and consulting with the BOA and getting a real sense of that. I guess at this point I would say, do we have any recommendations or suggestions on pursuing the drafting or coming up with something that would just be more clear, you know, even on the city website in the airport section that would consolidate some of these points, because it really all does play into the proper operation of an airport. I would add one more thing, you know, the airport community in general, you know, and the voices that really represent the general aviation community are working hard to try to craft a narrative to people who live around an airport, you know, and that the old adage is saying, well, you know, you shouldn't have built your house next to an airport if you knew an airport was there, and all those kinds of discussions. And those only serve to really create more friction between the airport and its surrounding communities. So I very much support something that, you know, if the commission can act in an educational way, an informative way to communicate, that's useful without overstepping boundaries. And I would leave, you know, that up to us doing our diligence and finding out where the existing policies that we're bound by have to be enforced. And I see Kevin has his hand up.
Sure, yeah, so next steps, just a recommendation. I think people would be surprised once they look at these documents and see what these areas of influence look like and how small they actually are. And they're based on runway length. So Dane County Airport, the Madison Airport would obviously have a much larger zone than Middleton Airport has a 4,000 foot runway. So, I mean, my recommendation would be the next step just to take a look at, you know, it's hard to make a decision on what the current guidance looks like when most people haven't had a chance to take a look at the what's recommended out there today, the current guidance on compatible land use. It's actually pretty small. I think it extends on a runway, the length of our runway, 4,000 feet, maybe 5,000 feet on each side is the safety area, and the noise area is much smaller than that. It is within the immediate vicinity of the airport. And then within that, there's tables that say, well, the density of housing should be this or that. And if it's over that, then the developers need to know that there's a potential noise impact. I mean, it's even within that 6,000 feet. It may be within a couple thousand feet of the runway. I think it'd be really surprising to see how is and what the recommendation is by both Caltrans and Wisconsin DOT. So I would say the next step would be to take a look at, you know, some of the key pages. There's a lot of information in there. I don't know how they take a handbook and turn it into several hundred pages, but there are some neat, really good tables in there and diagrams, and that'll help. You know, I've done some overlays myself, and for the most part, we're in compliance. So is the town of Middleton. It's all within compliance now. It's really, as we get more and more into the future, and as there's more and more encroachment, and it gets closer and closer and closer to the runway, people need to be aware that, hey, if they build homes or hospitals that close to the runway, they may want to consider extra insulation. I mean, it's guidance like that. So instead of us sitting here as a commission and getting feedback that people didn't know that it was good, there was going to be noise over their homes. They didn't know. That's the feedback that we've gotten from the community. So anyway, to repeat what I was saying, I think that, you know, the next step is to allow a little more time at the next meeting, just to look at a few of these diagrams and these tables. They're fairly straightforward. I don't see it taking up too much time.
Okay, Michelle Bond, please.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, does the Madison Airport have something that they do, or are there other airports similar to our size and things that have had noise issues? You know, seeing what other people have done might have some value too.
There probably is. I'm going to look back through some notes I have. It was somewhere else, obviously not even in the upper Midwest, but I did look into it once, and I'll see if I can find some information on that. I'm, curious as well. Thank you. Rich, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I know that Madison has done quite a bit along those lines. They actually, so they do have policies involved at Madison. Of course, they have a lot larger noise footprint than we do, of course.
Okay. Any further discussion? Any more comments?
I just wondered if
Oh,
Brian Gatto had anything to add, or any thoughts on what next steps might be, because obviously whatever we do eventually has to go through council.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kevin's suggestion of everyone taking some time to kind of get educated on things makes sense, because this is something that staff is trying to get educated on as well. So, I envision this being kind of a iterative type of project where we'll spend some time over the next couple of meetings getting educated and deciding what, if any, is the best course of action for us to add to what we're doing already presently. So, we may have a path forward here in the next couple of meetings, but we'll try to provide resources to the commission ahead of, future meetings, so you have time to digest things and we can have some additional conversation. To the original question earlier in the meeting about the covenant language or conditions of approval for new subdivisions, that's a question we can raise with legal counsel. I suspect it's more doable with a new project that's coming in front of the city for development approvals, rather than trying to retroactively fit it to an existing neighborhood, for example. So I don't know that there's much we can do there in terms of, if a home in an existing neighborhood sells, that they're required to make a disclosure. But for, the new subdivisions that are coming down the pike and new projects, there seems to be a nexus there that we can, attach a condition like that.
Okay. Oh, Kevin, you have your hand up.
Yes, and one thing I can do is I can provide Brian with the information, the links and the pages, so people don't have to spend hours trying to find this. It took me a while to go back and find some of this information myself, so I can't disseminate it directly to everyone. So I'll just, if Brian's okay, I'll just forward Brian. Okay. All right. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. Maybe one thing we can do, at least so moving ahead as we carry on this discussion, is it then going to be called compatible land use plan? I just think, for everybody to at least grab onto, it's good project planning to at least come up with how we want to title this moving forward as we continue to investigate.
I'd say give us some time to review the materials and decide, because depending on what sort of best management practices we want to implement, it might look more like a document rather than a plan. So I think that's not a major discussion point, but something we can definitely address at future meeting.
Okay, well, great. So then I guess my take on it is, this is a discussion, and this is a discussion to continue, and that there is really no actions or recommendations at this point coming from the commission. Anybody have any other thoughts on that? That sound about right? Okay. It looks like we are at the end of our agenda. Am I missing anything? Is there anything that slipped between the cracks? Great. Then did I see a hand go up? No?
Yeah, that, in my actual hand, yes.
Oh, please.
It's faster. Well, just thinking if we're on to future events and agenda items, I would like to have a discussion, maybe in conjunction with the update on the fuel truck. I'd like to have a discussion next time on whether or not to try to subsidize the purchase of the 94 UL. And then also, council has approved the, or soon will approve the ability of committees, commissions, and boards to continue to meet remotely if they so choose. But I do think, especially once new members are brought on, I think it's a good practice to try to have one organizational meeting in person so that the members of the commission can, interact and just get to know each other a little bit before we're on Zoom all the time. So maybe a discussion about that.
Okay, so that'll be a future discussion, meeting format then as well. Anything else? Okay, great. Then our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, David.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
next meeting.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.